That a slight technical malfunction. Welcome to this webinar on putting ECVET into practice for your Erasmus Plus mobility. Before we start the webinar proper, let's just cover the technical points and make sure that everyone can see and hear us. So hopefully this is what you see. And just to confirm that you say you can see and hear us, could you just, using the hands up button, just click that so that we know that everybody who's joined can actually see and hear us. We'll give you 30 seconds or so for that. Hello, we can only see 3 people who've raised their hands, and that's far less than have joined us. Could you just try it again? If you can't hear or see any of the slides, you can see at the bottom of the slide on the screen at the moment a email address. So if you email them, that's the comms team at Chorus, and they will try and assist you. We'll just give you another 30 seconds or so just to check it again. Okay, we seem to be okay. Right, let's introduce myself. I'm afraid we had under the Trade Descriptions Act, the preview for this webinar said there'll be 2 ECVET experts, but unfortunately due to illness, my colleague up in Scotland couldn't travel today, so I'm afraid you're stuck with me. My name is Phil Whitney. I work as a consultant with Colleges Wales on a variety of the European VET initiatives, but of particular note today, I'm here as one of the ECVET experts for the UK. Joining me today is Daniela Dimitrova, who works for Chorus, the national agency who handles all the VET applications. So she's handling the technical bits and will help me along the way. Right, why are we here? First of all, the webinar is aimed at all levels, but we're assuming an initial knowledge of ECVET. So we're not going to go into the background of ECVET in great detail, but mainly to remind you of the principles of ECVET, to remind you of the benefits of using ECVET in your mobility projects. And by the way, we don't care if you use the term ECVET or ECVET, they're both the same to us. To signpost you to find resources that can be used to support incorporating in ECVET into your projects, and most importantly, to discover how ECVET has been used in practice through a number of case studies we've come across over the last year or so in the ECVET Experts Network. The webinar is fairly short and sharp, will take approximately 30 minutes, so if you're not having it already, you'll still have time to have some lunch later. Right, I said we're not going into great detail about ECVET, but let's just remind you why ECVET is used and what the principles are. What is it? Well, the C in ECVET is not European Commission, it's the European credit system for VET. And it is a framework. And importantly, it covers a number of important points. First of all, it's the transfer, recognition, and accumulation of acquired and assessed learning outcomes with a view to achieving a qualification. In the UK, we use ECVET and focus on using ECVET for mobility. And that's obviously the prime aim of today. However, because it is used in terms of acquiring learning outcomes in any area, and then transferring and recognizing them later on, it is used can be used widely and transferred into lifelong learning. So for those of you who are involved in accrediting prior learning, the same principle apply. Learning which has taken place at a different place and time can be credited as long as it's been assessed and recognized at the time. What ECVET is not, it's not a qualification. You don't get a certificate at the end of it. What ECVET is a way of working and a set of principles. So on the same basis, it is not an awarding body. There's no European-wide body looking after ECVET. It is not compulsory. It is not compulsory at European country level, and it is not compulsory for Erasmus Plus applications. However, it is strongly recommended that you use European VET mobility tools, and ECVET is strongly recommended to be used within ECVET, not just because we say so, but because we know that it helps and provides a focus to ECVET mobility. And hopefully that is what we're going to show you later on today by looking at the case studies. And one other important point, and particularly if you haven't used ECVET before, there are a number of steps to ECVET, but it doesn't have to be implemented all in one go. And a lot of the case studies that we look at are organizations who've been involved in mobility for some years. And I can assure you they didn't put all the principles of ECVET into place on their first mobility, and they've gradually built up into using ECVET over a number of mobility programs. There are two important sets of principles at the heart of ECVET, and these relate very much to mobility. First of all, the use of learning outcomes. You're dealing learning outcomes every day. Qualifications are written in learning outcomes. And by providing a set of learning outcomes for your learners when they go on mobility, it gives a focus and allows you to clearly identify what learning will take place, and at the same time using agreed assessment, and when they return, validating that by whatever internal validation and verification methods you use, and having those recognized by the appropriate awarding bodies, or in Scotland, for example, it might be by your own institution. So these principles assist with the recognition of learning, no matter where it is achieved, whether it is learning in your home organization or overseas. The same principles apply. Obviously, you ask yourself, why should I bother? Despite the fact that Erasmus Plus applications recommend that you use it, there's got to be some benefit. So what are the benefits? Well, we see the benefits as twofold. There are benefits for the learners, and there are benefits for yourself, the VET institutions and the practitioner. As far as the learner is concerned, using ECVET provides a clear focus to any existing programs. So when learners go on mobility programs, by them understanding exactly what is to be achieved, they are able to concentrate, they're able to focus clearly, and they have an idea about what tangible outcomes would relate to that mobility period. Because those learning outcomes are assessed and then validated, so there's formal recognition, there's no need for the learner to repeat or to catch up on missed units, because they just take the place of the original units that would have been taught in their home organization. And by looking at and by using the quality assured and the documented learning using templates, which we're going to be talking about later, learners are better positioned to present all this information of the acquired skills to employers using documents such as Europass certificates. As far as you're concerned, the word focus comes into mind as well. It allows you to design mobility programs using units of learning outcomes so that both you and the receiving organization are clear about what's being delivered. Using documents such as the Memorandum of Understanding allows you to develop and enhance partnerships so that everybody is aware of what is required to take place during mobility. You, of course, can learn from peers in other European countries as well as they can learn from you. Not all learning, delivery, and assessment is the same across Europe, so there are a variety of methods you can use. And one thing which is clear from our case studies is that by using ECVET in your participation in VET mobility programs, enhances the profile of your organization and will help to promote learning and mobility to learners who want to come to your organization. Before we go in to look at the case studies proper, there is a wide range of resources available from a variety of places. There's a lot of information out there about using ECVET in mobility, and although this is a short webinar today, I can assure you that any questions that you have or information you require will be out there somewhere. The main source of information about ECVET currently can be found on the Erasmus Plus site. On the page which is entitled How You Can Use ECVET. And on that page, either in the key documents on the right-hand side or by clicking on the various icons which describe the various stages of mobility, you can bring up a wide range of information and resources to help you use and understand ECVET. If you're using ECVET in your Erasmus application, you must use the template for the Memorandum of Understanding and the Learning Agreement. And there are examples of completed Memoranda of Understanding and also completed learning agreements in a document produced within a project called DECVIP, and there's a link to that Make It Count document on the next but one slide. On the page How You Can Use ECVET, there are a number of ECVET fact sheets describing what you need to do before mobility, during mobility, after mobility. There's a link to a document which the ECVET expert team produced a number of years ago, and we've been updating it ever since, called Getting the Credit Your Learners Deserve. And there you will find an awful lot of information about ECVET. And because involving your awarding organization is important, ECVET UK have also produced guidance for awarding organizations. While awarding organizations all know and are aware of ECVET, some of the finer points might not be clear to them. So by discussing this document and sharing it with them, with maybe your external verifier, your lead verifier, you might get a better understanding of using ECVET. And finally, and very appropriate to today, we are including case studies on the ECVET pages of Erasmus Plus, and those have only recently been put on, and you'll find those in the key documents sidebar under ECVET stories on the ECVET page. There's also a separate case study highlight for one of the organizations we'll be talking about later. Other resources you can use, the CEDIFOP site. CEDIFOP are the European Reference Centre for Vocational Education and Training, and they have a vast amount of information related to all aspects of VET. A sister organisation of CEDIFOP is ReferNet, and that organisation, which in the UK is coordinated by ECTIS, again has a wide range of information and references on mobility programmes. And then finally, at a European level, all the European countries combine to produce an initial vocational education and training mobility scoreboard. And that's there's the link there. And that's a useful tool for comparing how learning and mobility across various sectors and organizations takes place in Europe. So if you're going to a particular country, you might want to compare their experience of mobility compared to ours. As far as ECVET experts in the UK are concerned, we run a number of workshops and events. Next year, we're planning targeted workshops and events in a number of places. This year, we've already had 2 workshops. We also have this webinar today, of course, but on the 21st of November, which is next Wednesday, we have a longer webinar about how to incorporate ECVET into an Erasmus Plus Key Action 1 VET application. So if you want more information about the practical side of incorporating ECVET into your application, you can register for that webinar. And finally, we also have a webinar on the 7th of December on introducing ECVET, which gives a broader background to ECVET principles and how it is used across Europe. So wide range of webinars. Next year, look out for information on targeted workshops, so you can have face-to-face workshops in various parts of the UK. You can also get individual telephone support provided by one of the UK ECVET expert team. Another very useful resource is the ECVET Mobility Toolkit. There's the link there. And this puts together practice from across Europe. Not only does it give you an introduction to ECVET and talks about a lot of the things we've mentioned already this morning, it also has a toolkit which is useful for both new comers to ECVET in mobility, but also to more experienced practitioners. And then finally, there's a lot of tools and examples and case studies. So a very useful and wide-ranging resource for you to use. Across the UK, there are 4 national coordination points: England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. But more particularly, this is backed up by a team of 11 national ECVET experts scattered across the UK. So if you do decide that you want a more personal discussion and contact Ecorus for a telephone call, you will probably find that one of your local ECVET experts will be contacting you and discussing any of your requirements. Right, let's now get into the last part of our webinar. Let's talk about how ECVET is used in practice. All the case studies are from colleges and VET providers who have a lot of experience in mobility projects. They use ECVET not because they have to, although I'd say we recommend it, but because they think it adds value to their projects, and that's important. One organization in Mid Wales who I've known for some time, a charity who deal with disadvantaged learners and students and send lots of people overseas, state quite clearly that their mobility projects wouldn't work without having ECVET as a background, because it gives some a clear structure to what they're about to do. All the case studies come from the ECVET community practice, which is a group of practitioners who join together and share good practice from around the UK. We have a range from around the UK, but please remember that more can be found on the How to Use ECVET section of the Erasmus Plus website. There's more on the website that we'll discuss today, so I'm just going to give you some brief details from a selection. But what you will find is that there are similar experiences and themes amongst many of the case studies. And indeed, lots of the benefits to learners and organizations hopefully will also be highlighted in these case studies. So let's have a look at some. We've been very diplomatic. We've included examples from Scotland, England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So we'll start our tour of the UK up in Glasgow. Glasgow Clyde College. I'm not going to read from the slide, but just to give you some background, Glasgow Clyde College is relatively new, created after a merger of 3 FE colleges. And although they were involved in mobilities up until 2013, after the merger, mobility activity was put on hold for about 5 years. However, they've been well aware of ECVET and in fact hosted groups of learners and teachers from different European countries who wanted to use ECVET and have produced their own workshops. However, now they've settled down into a new identity with the college, they're starting mobility activity again. So they have a current KA project, which is quite large, 66 students across various curriculum areas, dance, business admin, travel, tourism, sports, and also includes engineering apprentices. They're expecting to double these mobilities next year, and they're at the stage of communicating with staff across the college to tell them not only about the mobility, but ECVET. They have created a document to tell everyone, staff everything they need to know to prepare for mobility, and including identifying the most appropriate learning opportunities that can be covered successfully during their 3-week placement. Previously, when they've hosted incoming students, they had memorandum of understanding and learning agreements, but that's been less about certification, but more outcome-based. However, things are changing now within Glasgow Clyde. They've just recently received a group of students from Cyprus, and under the terms of their MOU with that college, they brought their own assessors to assess the students on the spot and accredit the learning on the return home. One interesting aspect of how they're using ECVET is within KA2 projects. Although mobility is primarily for KA1, some KA2 projects allow mobility within them. So within 2 KA projects they're involved with, they are using the ECVET structure to create detailed learning agreements and memorandum of understanding, and with their project partners have created a series of small 12-hour units of learning written as learning outcomes. And this shows the flexibility of ECVET, and the principles of using learning outcomes is that you can create your own units. So they've created a unit leveled at EQF level 3, and although they're at a testing stage now, if it's successful, students from all the partner countries will do these units while they're on mobility placement and be assessed by the participating host organization. So what they see as the main benefits of ECVET, and this is a phrase which will come up time and time again, is that it will bring structure, add structure to the mobility, and is a strong platform for quality assurance. We always like to have a top tip. Their top tip is about communicating with staff. Make sure it's not just 1 or 2 people involved, but share it with all staff in all the areas involved with the learner, to inform of the benefits of ECVET and what is happening. And obviously having supports of management and principals, they say, has made a big difference. Staying in Scotland, we're looking at New College Lanarkshire. Let's say Lancashire then. Lanarkshire. They are experienced college and they've been using ECVET principles for many years. But as I've said at the beginning, instead of introducing it all in one go, they've built it up gradually year by year. So they've introduced formal recognition for knowledge and skills, and they use the MOU to define quite clearly the lines of communication, the design of the training program, to identify placements and clarify support, workplace mentors, etc. So they're using the MOU and learning agreements, the ECVET documents, to clearly signpost both sides, both participating and host organization, into what is required for the mobility. One thing that they have done quite successfully, and it's part of their top tips, they say look for opportunities to include additional qualifications connected to mobility and the world of work. So although this is only specifically for Scotland, all their students undertake additional SQA modules, employability modules, dealing with work situations, responsibility of employment. So all their learners do, they're involved in mobility, take these extra modules. And this is a good example of using mobility to include additional qualifications, and of course it's a fantastic arena to monitor some of the soft skills. One interesting aspect of what New College are doing is that they've also developed a unit aimed at developing awareness of lifestyles in different countries. So this complements the participants' vocational qualifications that are tested while the learner is away. They think that ECVET has helped to raise the profile of the college because also they were awarded Erasmus Plus Quality Certificate in recognition of the high quality projects that they ran and their strategic approach, and this is in no small way to using ECVET. One thing that they say in the longer term, they want to work closely with their EU partners on validation and recognition of learning outcomes. During 2015, a number of their students undertook a French language training and work placement activity and had their skills and competencies recognized on presentation of a certificate by their host partner. And they want to take this further. There's potential equality issue they recognize regarding assessment standards, and this is they appreciate that, and this is something that they need to, and you need to discuss with your awarding body. Moving across the border into England, Ray Europe are an organisation who supports colleges with mobility placements in the South Gloucestershire, Stroud, Bristol area, but also in Leicester. And they have a separate case study on the Erasmus Plus page if you want to learn more about them. They've been using ECVET for some years, using learning agreements, using MOUs, and they are quite clear that having the MOU and learning agreements helps to structure the placement and ensure that learners know what they're setting out to achieve. And also using the MOU helps to ensure the employers hosting the placements are very clear about the task and responsibilities the learners should undertake. Their top tip is to be realistic about what evidence receiving organizations can and cannot provide. This obviously takes into account not only the time that learners are away, but also about the level of understanding that the host organization has and possibly the resources and the different assessment methods. So only having a clear dialogue with your host organization can this be covered. And also have a clear understanding of what assessment evidence is needed so that when learners get to the host organization, that everyone is clear about what assessment is going to happen, when it's taking place, and how it's going to be validated when they come back home. Any top tips? Yes, be realistic and have clear understanding. Portal training in Wales. Very experienced. I know Portal Trading. Claire Jeffries from Portal Training was a guest speaker at one of our workshops in Birmingham a couple of months ago. They've been using ECVET in their Erasmus Plus projects for 6 or 7 years. The one thing which they are using their MOUs and the documentation is to provide a more focused mobility experience. So all learners have to have a learning agreement, but by using the standard template, Portal Training have adapted that so not only are the learning outcomes clearly outlined for the student, but also there's a grid which they can mark when it's assessed and validated. So learners are quite clear about how this ECVET documentation is used. It's not just signed and filed away. It is a working document which both the learner and the assessor can use. Their top tips: look at what best fits your project. Not everything suits everybody else. And again, this advice to concentrate on taking little steps to incorporate ECVET gradually. They started off using it in a fairly limited way, and with experience and with developing strong partnerships, they've been able to expand and use more ECVET principles as each mobility period goes on. Coming back to England, Leeds City College are not in the case studies in the Erasmus Plus website at the moment, but there's hope that it will be developed into a larger case study and expand on what is there already. ECVET is used by Leeds City College, particularly in areas such as childcare, health and social care, travel and tourism, where work placements are integral to the qualifications. And this is obviously a much better fit. So in the 3 weeks spent of placement in Europe, their work placement contributes towards their qualification requirement. And as the work content is described in learning outcomes, this strengthens and complements their entire qualification experience. So using the learning outcome approach allows learners to focus clearly on what is needed, and allows assessors to be clear also about what is required. They see the benefits, again, of ECVET as bringing far more structure to the mobility, and in future they'd like to capture the impact that ECVET mobility has on students in a far more formal and measurable way. And they're looking at ways to develop new sets of indicators to allow some form of impact analysis. Their top tip, their top tip is to get curriculum staff on board early in the process. And finally, the last two case studies, we're over in Northern Ireland. Northwest Regional College, one of the 6 FE colleges in Northern Ireland, been using ECVET principles in many of its projects for years. They have currently partners in a number of countries across Europe, and they again use the MOU clearly to outline the lines of communication, the design of training programs, etc. They find that ECVET gives partners a much better idea of what's expected of them. And one interesting way that ECVET is used and enhances the program is that the Northwest Regional College have an in-house CPD program, and the project manager uses this vehicle to showcase the mobility projects, and experienced participants are asked to share their experience with staff in this dissemination. And the project manager intends to train activity coordinators across the college so that more mobilities are identified and ECVET is used. And finally, the Foyle International institution in sorry, just pause that for a second. What? Oh, sorry. And finally, Foyle International, they've been using it for some time, and as a receiving organization, because this is a bilateral approach, they see using ECVET learning outcomes as essential to be able to match incoming learners with appropriate training. So obviously this involves dialogue with their partners. So clearly, before mobility takes place, learning outcomes are identified and matched to appropriate training in the host companies and organizations. One thing that they've done, again, is to develop a course which has been validated by Open College Network. Validated by Open College Network by looking at courses in various countries and finding common learning outcomes that could be shared. Their top tip, again, be realistic when working with different working environments in a different country, and using the MOU aids this understanding. That brings us to the end of this fairly short and sharp webinar. If you have any questions, please put it on the chat. I've had a question about one attendee asked if we could repeat the date of the upcoming webinar. I'll do that for you. Just let me check my dates. We have one next week on Wednesday, which is the 21st of November, which is about putting ECVET into practice in your application. And although we will repeat some of the basic principles of ECVET, there'll be far more time spent on incorporating ECVET into your application. And also there's one on the 7th of December, which is a more general webinar on ECVET, the ECVET approach and how it is being used in Europe. So I trust that answers that. Okay, we'll be around for half an hour or so. So if there are any questions, please send them in via the question button on your screen. If not, thank you very much for listening, and wish you a good day.